and then we'll jump right in. Um, let's start with, well, we lost somebody. Um, Lisa, let's start downriver.
Yes, indeed, from the Northern Neck. Good morning, everyone. From Warsaw, the Northern Lisa Hall with the Northern Neck Planning District Commission.
And just since that's so much fun, we'll stay in the lower end. Tommy.
Tommy Blackwell, Essex County, and friend of the Rappahannock.
Um, Larry.
Larry Zaragoza. I live in Northern Virginia.
We appreciate you making that clear. Deirdre, you're on mute.
Um, oh, Deirdre, I just clicked a button on the hosting side that says ask participant to unmute. It should populate on your screen.
Yeah, you're still muted, Deirdre. All right. Oh, there you go.
Oh, okay, there we go. I had a lot of trouble this morning. We had a lot of storms last night. So anyway, Deirdre Clark with John Marshall Soil and Water Conservation District in Fauquier County.
Thank you. Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Edwards, Director of Regional Planning with the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission.
John.
Hi, John Brindle with Stafford County Utilities and Environmental Program Manager.
Let's see. I've got Brian. Go ahead.
Good morning. This is Brian Johnson with Virginia Farm Bureau.
Brianna.
Hi, Brianna Heath with the George Washington Regional Commission.
Don.
Don McCowan with Piedmont Environmental Council.
And Ella.
Hi, everyone. Ella Higgins with the Department of Health, specifically the Office of Environmental Health Services.
Glad to have you. And I am expecting one or two more folks who had asked for the link, so we may have others pop in. What we're going to do this morning is a little different. John and Larry volunteered to give presentations on the guidance document that EPA released that I sent to everybody. And so to get us started, John, Larry, who wants to start?
I think if Larry started out, it'd be best. He
Okay.
has more background information in his presentation.
Very good. Larry, you should be able to share your screen. And you're on mute.
I always do better when I unmute. So, are you able to see
Yes,
my
we can see
screen
you.
okay? Actually, that's not how I want it to look. Let me see if I could fix that a little bit.
And as long as if you go down to if slideshow from beginning, and then as long as you have, I'm not sure how many monitors you're working with, but the full screen mode should populate for us.
I'm sorry, Julian, you said.
No, do you have? I think you should be okay as long as that works great. Sometimes there's an issue when there's multiple monitors, but that's perfect.
Okay, good. Okay, so I prepared a few slides to talk about the EPA proposed biosolids guidance for PFAS. And So I thought this was something that was of interest. And just by way of background, I worked for EPA for about 40 years, uh, and I was involved in policy development and scientific issues, um, and like PFAS, dioxins, PCBs, and others. I worked out of the Superfund program. Okay, so I organized things to talk about why are the standards important? What is EPA providing in terms of direction? Um, what are some of the challenges trying to balance out risks and benefits? And talk a little bit about the Virginia legislation that was passed this year, and some of my thoughts on recommendations. And in terms of recommendations, my thought is, in the end, 5, 10 years from now, we're going to need to be taking certain actions. And I think the more um, if we can move in a consistent direction, I think that's a positive thing as opposed to moving in different directions and constantly adjusting. Okay, so why are these standards important? So if you look at the management of biosolids, what EPA does, and they're required to do this by law, is to set numeric limits for the land application of biosolids. They also need to set numeric limits for disposal, incineration, um, and so at this point, at this point, the PFAS has not been designated as a hazardous waste. Um, that it had so that it needs to be managed in certain ways. So you're going to need to have standards when that actually does happen. So EPA ends up setting these numeric limits that's required under Section 405 of the Clean Water Act. Um, we need to look at the different ways that it might be disposed of. Um, and the Clean Water Act also requires that EPA look at these standards every 2 years and set limits for them. So one of the things that EPA did in 2025 is they um, developed a draft risk assessment for PFAS, and that included a limit of 1 ppb for biosolids. Now, the risk assessment is not a regulation. What it is it's a background document that's used in order to support a regulation. And and it goes through a lot of review, a lot of technical discussions, um, and then on July 6th of this year, EPA published a draft guidance for the management of PFOA and PFOS in biosolids. And so that guidance retreated from the numeric levels that were published in the 2025 risk assessment, and it provided general recommendations. But one of the things that didn't happen is they didn't revisit the science. They didn't basically look and say the science was incorrect for one reason or another. They simply said, because there's all this foundational science, and that was not really questioned. There were comments made about it, but it was not revisited. Uh, and so, in the absence of any numeric standards, states are basically left to try to take some action so that when eventually there are limits imposed, um, hopefully we'll at least be moving in the right direction. Some of the challenges, um, in the absence of a numeric limit, states, local governments, wastewater treatment facilities, and others really don't have a target for PFAS and biosolids. So folks aren't sure exactly what to do. Um, and so it's also complicated by the fact that you look at developing drying facilities to manage this stuff, incineration facilities, siting new landfills. All this stuff takes a lot of time and a lot of resources. And there's also other issues as well, like being able to measure the stuff. So you want to have laboratories that are available to measure it and where they can give you timely results, and that where you won't have to send the samples too far away. Um, so those are all logistical considerations. Um, So right now we're in a period of a fair amount of uncertainty. Um, but from my perspective, one of the things that we have that works in our favor is we can look at the science. We can basically ask what's reasonable. We can try to build agreement because in the end, uh, there will be need to take action to manage the risks associated with PFAS in biosolids. Trying to get my page to check okay, there it goes. So one of the things I think that's important to point out is that land application of biosolids is viewed as a constructive reuse of organic material that reduces costs for POTWs and landowners seeking to fertilize their land. That's a good thing. And when you have the standards that we have right now, they address other contaminants that might be present in biosolids, but they don't address the PFAS. And so PFAS they're highly toxic, they're incredibly resilient, um, and they have been known to contaminate crops, drinking water, wells, and fisheries so that they are no longer safe for use. Um, Potential liability concerns. So one of the big things that I think people concern themselves with is liability. So the Superfund law basically ties liability to contamination and requires cleanup and repayment for costs incurred. Then you also have tort liability. So someone could sue you because um, your health has been impaired as a result of exposure. Uh, we've certainly seen this with a lot of other chemicals. We've seen it with lead and other things. Um, both kinds of liability can take place, and there's other laws as well that could play a role in this. Um, so I would say that right now, the uncertainty created by the lack of clear direction from the federal government makes it much harder to know what action to take. So this year we had an active year in terms of Virginia legislation. I view it as a step forward. There was a 25 ppb level that's going to be imposed. There's a 50 ppb level as well that was put out. Um, but even the 25 ppb level is generally higher than levels that we would expect in the absence of industrial sources, um, which is and I've heard that from a few people. Um, because we don't have um, right now, the Clean Water Act is going to call for revisiting the whole level issue. And the 2025 risk assessment is, I'm sure, going to be revisited because even if there's no other reason at all, science will evolve. There will be more scientific studies. Generally, I find that when you have more scientific studies, what tends to happen is you tend to end up targeting lower numbers. Um, but that's not always the case. I've seen it go both ways. So additional actions to reduce PFAS levels in biosolids may not be required um, in Virginia law right now, but in the long run, we'll probably need to reduce PFAS levels to something closer to 1 ppb than to the 25 number. Uh, then working towards a lower number will probably make it a bit easier uh, in the long term because if we make changes gradually, uh, it's not going to be as disruptive, as not as costly. Um, so I really think it's important to think about the long term so that you don't have these swings in behavior and actions. And in the long term, I think it's critical that consumer products must be banned. There's a lot more that can be done. There's so many consumer products that have PFAS in them that makes absolutely no sense to me. I just don't understand why they're still there. So I have a few recommendations I want to just propose. Um, One is that Very high levels of PFAS contamination will likely be designated as hazardous waste, which I noted earlier, and require disposal in a hazardous waste landfill or incineration. Right now, we have both incineration and we have some biosolids that are also disposed in landfills. In Fairfax County, where I live, we incinerate a good part of the biosolids that are generated within the county. Um, if we end up with a land, land disposal limit, um, land application limit below 25, we're probably going to end up seeing the need for additional drying capacity. Actually, we're already seeing the need for additional drying capacity. There's multiple facilities that are building these drying facilities, um, and we're also going to need more landfill capacity or incineration. Uh, I don't think anyone likes the idea of incinerating it, and I don't think anyone likes the idea of landfilling. But the question is, how do you manage the risk so you don't end up exposing people to unsafe levels of material? And it becomes a cycle as you put it in the ground, and it's persistent, so it's hard to get rid of. Um, I think it's important to end up um, developing um, capacity so that we can manage this stuff responsibly. Um, that's going to take time. Um, and one of the things to think about too is at 25 ppb, my understanding is you're not going to have an unacceptable level from a one-time application. It takes multiple applications to get to the point where it's just unacceptable. It's way too contaminated. So if you go to lower levels, then you're going to be able to continue um, to land apply the material. Um, and the question is, how much can you tolerate on the land? And then there's a lot of issues about um, on the science in terms of exactly if it just stays there or if it migrates in water or what actually happens. One of the other key points I think to think about is that federal and state funding is absolutely needed in order to help with these issues. Um, POTWs are publicly funded, um, and even if it's a private facility, um, taxpayer dollars are most likely going to help uh, fund the work. And so, in the end, the public pays for all this stuff. And so you really want to you don't want to have a disproportionate impact if you can. You want to try to minimize that. Um, I might share with you that one of my first job at EPA, one of my office directors said, as as a federal employee, it's your job to look at things without considering the politics. What you really want to do is you want to ask what's going to be good for the long term, what does the science say, what does the law say, and work within those bounds. And so if you try to look at things from that kind of a framework, you want to think about the long term and try to think about how to um, develop policies without moving the needle you don't want to move the needle so that the goals change with because that creates additional costs and uncertainty for the regulated industry. Okay, and those are the slides I had.
Larry, thank you. And I will open it to questions, but I want to hear from John first and for a slightly different perspective, and then we'll open it up to questions either way. So, John, are you ready? You should be able to share your screen. Excellent.
And I was muted. All right, you can see that now?
Yes.
Awesome. All right, well, yeah, thanks everybody. I did want to so yeah, Larry, I think appreciate your presentation, especially the background side of it. I'm really kind of focused on the new draft guidance that came out, and yeah, I'm appreciative of being able to kind of give the utility perspective on this. Um, so yeah, I kind of went through and just pulled out some quotes, and then just want to discuss how they're relevant. So when the risk assessment came out, that was a desktop white paper that EPA went through and did some calculations based upon the known science for PFAS. As Larry stated, it was not intended to be a specific regulation, but after it came out, there was a lot of misinterpretation of what the risk assessment meant and what it was intended to do. So this is a direct quote from the guidance that just says that the risk assessment did contain some serious flaws that caused a lot of confusion. And a lot of that guidance document is very similar to the American Wastewater Association and the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. They submitted comments on the risk assessment that really did mirror a lot of what the draft guidance had to say about the assessment itself. And that is with open eyes, recognizing that we do have a little bit of a tug of war going on at the federal level between the previous administration and the current one. Moving on. So one of the major kind of sticking points for the utility associations is that the draft risk assessment used a hypothetical scenario that just is not representative of typical biosolids practices or typical food crop, agricultural practices across the country. And it used this homestead family that was 100% sourcing their food, meat and vegetable, from locally then PFAS impacted lands. There was this hypothetical scenario, and that's how these calculations were run. And then however, the reality is that even from the risk assessment that biosolids are applied to less than 1% of American croplands. So there's several points of the risk assessment that talk about the fact that there is not this pervasive issue of PFAS contamination in the food supply. And I think that's an important point to drive home. One of the other things that I think is a major point of confusion is the use of the 1 part per billion value. That was used again as this hypothetical because the EPA needed some number to plug in there. But the 1 part per billion was never intended to be a regulatory driver because there is a huge difference between when we develop a regulatory limit, which is based upon, even when using health statistics, is based upon like occurrence of negative effects, whereas a risk assessment is really looking for that zero effect level, kind of similar to how the PFAS human health criteria was developed. And when you're going from a safe level down to a zero effect level, you end up with a much lower limit. And try not to get too into the weeds there with it. But again, that 1 part per billion was never intended to be a specific regulatory target. A couple quotes actually from the draft guidance that mention Virginia specifically, that talks about the new legislation that we passed and our tiered approach. And I do think that is important to note that Virginia is taking action. And in reality, we are ahead of the curve nationally as far as our biosolids management and our PFAS management. And then with that law, and I'll talk a little bit more about that here on the next slide, we haven't even seen that law really go into effect yet. And then again, just to hit the point home from the draft guidance, that we do not see widespread contamination in the food supply. Um, and so if we look at it as, going back 5, 10 years, if that was no regulation at all and nobody was paying attention to PFAS, and so what we're seeing as the current situation is with no PFAS regulation on biosolids, and we're still not seeing that breakthrough into the mainstream food supply. I do think that we need to just pause slightly and see where we are really trying to stop that impact, and where the general public is going to get those exposure avenues from. And yeah, and that's not a scientific fact there at the bottom. That is a John opinion, but in most cases, there is more PFAS in the food wrapper than is in the food itself. So I think when we're really starting to drill down on biosolids and food production, there are other things that I would consider even lower hanging fruit in order to reduce the public's exposure to PFAS. Then just these are just some of my professional opinions. But yeah, take these as you will. But I really think that Virginia is in a good place with the current legislation that we passed, which again doesn't go into effect until this year. We're going to start sampling biosolids in January. The first application limits go into effect in July of next year. And then we actually have a second phase that goes into effect in 2029, where we go from individually regulating the compounds to regulating them as a combined value, which, depending on how you look at it, has the effect of essentially cutting that limit in half again. Because we're no longer looking at PFOA and PFOS separately, we're combining those numbers and then applying the same application tiers. So we really are about to enter sort of the first phase of that PFAS regulation, and really the sampling that's going to occur in 2027, I think, is going to be very telling, and that's going to be the first time that we have done a statewide sampling. So it's not going to be until we start getting those results in that we're really going to understand what the level of the problem is in Virginia. In addition to that, the draft guidance did release several recommendations, sort of best management practices for biosolids to help reduce human exposure. And a lot of those things are already in practice in Virginia, including limits on food crops, limiting human exposure. So if it's public access land or even close to public access land, and then as well as setbacks for drinking water wells and our waterways. So like I said, I really do think that Virginia I'd say we're pointed in the right direction, and we really just, in my opinion, need to see where this goes initially before we start talking about next steps. A couple of times, Larry in his presentation as well mentioned that the science is constantly evolving, and that is something that I will definitely agree with. That research is ongoing even currently into the fate of the PFAS as far as how it migrates down into the soil, across the ground, potentially into waterways, and then what the crop actual uptake of the PFAS is, which from a lot of the science I've seen is actually crop dependent, that different plants absorb it in different ways, which then makes the management side very difficult, and then also the regulatory side equally as difficult. And then what affects the low level PFAS has, and our consumer safety as far as where you're getting exposure, and in what ways can those exposures have negative effects. Something from the utility perspective that I have said about PFAS from every avenue, whether it's drinking water, wastewater, biosolids, whatever, is that I really believe right now, both locally and nationally, we're stuck in this practice of we seem to be regulating PFAS in the middle. And what I mean by that is if we're expecting the drinking water plant and the wastewater plant to be our filter for these things before they get to the public or before they get into the environment, but we're doing nothing to stop those products from coming into the wastewater plant, or we're working on practices to stop them coming into our drinking water source waters without any movement on the use and manufacture of PFAS. I really feel like, as Larry also mentioned, we're putting the burden back on our ratepayers and our citizens to clean up a mess that we're not addressing the creation of it, and we're continuing to pump more and more PFAS into the consumer sphere and into the commercial sector, and it's all eventually coming down the pipe to the wastewater plant, and a lot of that does unfortunately then end up in your biosolids. One thing that I will disagree with Larry on is that 25 part per billion. And while I do agree that whether it's one or 25 or four or 100, none of the limits we've even proposed on PFAS are scientifically based. 25 was just a nice round number that was put in the legislation. Um, but I do disagree that what we are seeing as far as the data coming in from the POTWs is that that 25 level is actually pretty close to the breaking point of where you see wastewater plants that have no industrial sources and it's all residential base versus ones that do have point sources and can make some meaningful reductions and some high level industrial dischargers. But that 25 is right about where we see, if we're under that, it's typically, or a lot of the times, it is from that residential waste side. And then a lot of the high profile national cases involving biosolids were actually not biosolids. They were industrial residuals. They were not the application of municipal biosolids, which generally speaking have much, much lower levels than, in particular, I believe the case with the cows and everything was waste from a paper mill that heavily used PFAS that was then put on either the cropland or the cow field. I can't remember honestly the specifics off the top of my head, but I do know that those were industrial waste and not municipal biosolids. Larry did mention a couple times about the beneficial use of biosolids. I really have always been an advocate for the sustainable use of biosolids. I think it does put a lot of good nutrients back into the ag sector, as well as it's a cost-effective and sustainable disposal method for the utility. Um, to move to either landfilling or to a destruction technology is going to come with a very large price tag for the POTWs. And, like in Stafford County, most of them are 100% ratepayer funded. So if my capital costs go up, I am either deferring other projects. So then I have, um, then now I have an aging infrastructure that I'm not repairing, or our rates have to go up, and that cost is then passed directly on to the people that we're trying to protect. Uh, when we look at destruction technologies, we then create either a biochar or an ash is the end byproduct on those, and we end up losing a lot of those beneficial recycle and reuses of the biosolids. Um, and then one thing that Larry and I also can most definitely agree on is really whatever avenue we take regulatory on the biosolids and PFAS, it is going to require significant additional funding at the state and federal level for us to make any real significant movement on reducing the levels in the biosolids. So I think that's all I have. It is. So yeah, thank you everyone for the time, and I would also be happy to take some questions.
Okay, John, Larry, thank you very much. You all put a lot of time into this and a lot of thoughtful information has been shared with everybody. I'm going to open it up for comments and questions, but let's do the questions first. If there's anything people need clarity on, and then points of view, reactions, what have you. So questions. You guys must have had wonderfully clear presentations. Good job. Okay, then comments and if folks have questions that pop in their mind when comments are being made, we can do that as well. Deirdre, you're right off mute.
Well, my first question is, will both of these presentations be available online? And I wanted to thank
Absolutely.
both individuals for the time and effort that they put into both presentations. They were excellent. Lots of food for thought. One of the issues.
Deirdre will also have this recording posted in the same place. It'll be on our past meetings page, and Jillian will send a note out when she's got everything up there.
Okay, that's great. I figured that was the case, but I thought I'd thought I'd ask. Anyway, in none of the issues that I have read about or investigated have adequately addressed the cumulative effects of biosolids on any land use. And that is concerning. And as both speakers indicated, the research has a long way to go. And with so many questions, why continue the use? Bottom line.
So I'll just respond to that for a minute, Deirdre. What you're saying is exactly the way a lot of other folks feel. There is uncertainty, but one of the things that but there is uncertainty, and one of the things that we do know is that I think it's something like 98% of us have PFAS in our bodies. It's already there. As time goes on, there's going to be more studies. People are going to see more in terms of health effects. It's probably going to end up saying that maybe effects are seen at even lower levels than what we're seeing right now. There may be some science that says something about there may be some reasons why maybe they find that some of it sometimes breaks down more, but in the end, I see that we're probably going to have to go to lower levels in order to be protective and in order to minimize liability for the people that are involved in this. I really agree with John about his point that the wastewater treatment facilities and drinking water treatment plants are in the middle of this. I mean, they receive contaminated waters, they treat them, and they're looking to operate efficiently, but we really need to treat the sources.
Thanks, Larry. Other comments, reactions?
Eldon, sorry.
Go ahead, Michelle.
Sorry. I mean, as I've said before, I'm not a technical expert on PFAS by any means, so I certainly appreciate the presentations and the work that was put into it, and wholeheartedly agree that treating the source of these things is really the most important thing, and not relying solely on the utilities to be bearing the brunt of the expenses. And because they cannot rely on a maybe or an if to use taxpayer dollars, or not taxpayer dollars, but users' fees to be projecting what this could or could not look like 5-10 years from down the line. However, I also am in a more rural farming area that relies heavily on farming for both, direct economic development and also tourism. And so if I'm thinking basically, if they do find out that this is a big problem 10 years down the line, 20 years down the line, and all of this farmland that has been using biosolids becomes essentially somewhat of a Superfund site, the whole economy could collapse. And I'll also say that the other hat I wear is running our food system program. So talking about it not showing up in our food supply is a bit disingenuous, because most of our food in our grocery store, the vast majority, comes from Mexico or California. It's not coming from the farmer down the road. And if they're looking at our grocery stores and McDonald's, etc., the big lettuce scare that is in the news right now is food from Mexico. It's not food from the United States, even though that's what we're eating. So just because it's not showing up in our food supply doesn't have anything to do with the farms that are in Virginia, for example. So I think that needs to be also taken into consideration, even though in my area, we get our food from the farmer down the street or the farmer's market or the farm stands and whatnot. The vast majority of Americans do not, unfortunately. And while that's something I'm working to change, it's not reality that we're dealing with right now. So I would wonder, what that data takes into consideration when we're talking about showing up in our food supply. What food supply are they talking about? And I do have concerns, certainly, with, people thinking they're buying food from the farmer's market and it's healthy and maybe it's not, and all of that type of thing. So it's kind of a catch-22. I hear both sides of the story, and I think there's merit in both sides.
Thank you, Michelle. Good points, all. I'm using the fact that people have turned on their cameras as an indicator that they want to speak. And I think Sarah turned on hers first. And I don't know if you've got a comment or a question, Sarah. And I think Chris was next, and then Tommy.
I do not.
Okay, you just wanted us all to see you were here. Okay, good. That's great. Chris, did you have one?
Yeah, good morning, Eldon, and everybody. Good to be with you again. Obviously, some very interesting perspectives on broad societal problem, widespread use of PFAS and all sorts of commercial products we bring into our homes every day. The couple quick things I wanted to share. I spent a couple days in Cleveland last week, where EPA officials were speaking to the National Association of Clean Water Agencies. These are the utilities like John's utility.
One of the groups that John referenced.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Right.
So their leadership from around the country convenes for a couple of days every summer on current issues, a lot of collaboration, a lot of information from EPA on the latest and greatest. And kind of consistent with the two lead-off presentations, we heard from EPA's Dr. Andrew Sawyer, who's been with EPA for many, many years, and he was acknowledging the flaws in the risk assessment and the ways it's been misinterpreted. EPA was almost apologetic for the communications problem that they created, or which resulted from how that was read and understood. The other piece that really jumped out at me, being a Virginian in a room full of folks from the 50 states, was that, and I think I saw in John's presentation a couple quotes that touched on this. EPA was giving Virginia a lot of credit with just a handful of other states, and in one case singled us out with Maryland as having like the most proactive approach to this. These are the limits that Larry and John referred to in their presentations, the 25 and the prohibition at 50. So we just came out of a General Assembly session where there was a solid debate all through the session on what to do next in the Commonwealth. There was a big agreement around a multi-year program that EPA credits as one of the most aggressive in the country. And it starts next year and it phases in over 3 years before it's even running at the ultimate levels. So we've just established a very proactive program. I think that needs 5 or 10 years to get going. If other states or the EPA develop other approaches that have merit that we look at along the way, great. I think they're going to spend their time trying to catch up to us. Meanwhile, back on the commercial side and manufacturing and such, those manufacturers are all looking at their product composition, where the things that we all want to buy can be made differently with different products. So we're going to continue to see those inputs go down for all the reasons that have been mentioned: consumer preferences, liability risks, things like that. So this thing is on a much improved trajectory. And as Virginians, I think we can be proud to be driving that in a good direction.
Thank you, Chris. Tommy, you have a comment?
Mike, I was going to ask the question of basically what was the timeline of legislation out of the last General Assembly. So Chris answered that very well. So I'm good.
Okay. We don't need to kind of put a finer point on that.
I'm okay.
Okay. All right. Other comments, questions? Okay, this has been excellent, and John and Larry, I echo what others have said. Really appreciate y'all being willing to sit down and put together your thoughts and your perspectives. And I know there was some back and forth, and that's a good thing. I purposely stayed out of your email communications back and forth, it paid off. And what do we know? What do we not know? What do we need more clarity on? What have we better start paying attention to? I heard all that. Here's what I'm thinking at this point. We have 2 more meetings before the September 30 River Basin Commission meeting. I've got 2 things really on the plate for that meeting that channels to some degree through this committee. This work, clearly, but also the Rappahannock tribe question. And you guys are going to be seeing more about that. I'm working on a 2-part report on that. Pardon me if I'm diverting a little bit, and I'm going to come back to PFAS. I'm working on a 2-part report. One, what is the history of the Rappahannock tribe, which is fascinating. I've learned more than just stuff I had no idea. And I've actually prepared the first draft of that and sent it to the tribe to get their, what did I get wrong? What did I miss? Because they know it far better than any of the rest of us. And then the second part is going to be the question of tribal membership on the commission. And what we're looking at is there's full membership, kind of like a county, but they're really not like a county. They're a sovereign entity, and their sovereignty is not based on the same thing that counties are. But that's the closest existing membership category, counties and city, that we have. So is it something different? Is there an advisory status? Is there an ex officio? There are different options. And so what I want to do is kind of put drafts in front of this committee at the August meeting for people to react to. It'll go out in advance, and we can follow up in September because the River Basin Commission meeting isn't until the last Wednesday of the month. This technical committee meets, I think, the second Wednesday. So, and then what I'd like to do is I want to take the 2 presentations. I want to take our notes that we use. Zoom helps assemble, and Jillian does some really good work in trying to capture what people say and turn that into, well, kind of what I just said a little while ago. All right, we have the draft guidance that came out. It was a follow-up to the 2025 work. And here's where we are. And here's the things that policymakers need to be thinking about. And I'm going to try to capture all the comments that have been made here, from Deirdre, why are we doing this at all, to Chris, we're on a logical path. Okay, guys, I know I really, was a gross summary of what both of you said, but those kind of different perspectives. So to put that before the elected. So look for interesting stuff to read and react to over the course of our next two meetings. And I imagine when the Indian tribe, the Rappahannock tribe discussion, we will have some different folks participating in that part of the discussion. Anyway, so that's my view of going forward. I'd love to hear anybody's immediate reactions. You haven't had time to think about any of that because this is all we're trying to. Julian and I are trying to kind of walk and chew gum at the same time with some of this.
Eldon, I'll just say that I like what you said. I also might offer you a few more comments as well. I could put them in the briefing, because one of the things that I do see is you go from administration to administration and they portray things very differently. And and this administration is a bit more extreme than most. So.
And yeah, understood. All we got to do is open the newspaper or turn on the daily news. Okay. Other comments, perspectives?
Yeah, just one comment, Eldon, and kind of as a follow-up to what Larry just said, in that first document that you sent out, the sentence that caught my eye that kind of set the stage, and I'm being sarcastic, but why change now? Is addressing PFAS and, quote, making America healthy again. Seriously? Yeah. Okay. I'll say no more.
Well, yeah. Well, thank you. Don, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I just wanted to flag that the Virginia Conservation Network's legislative priority document is kind of in final draft stages, and they've got a couple of policy position papers on PFAS that should be kind of ready for at least maybe consumption, maybe before that end of September meeting. So I'd just like to kind of maybe hold a space for taking a look at that document during this process before anything gets finalized. So hopefully by the end of September, that should be maybe ready.
Don, can you follow up this meeting with a brief email to me with a little more, tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Jillian and I are coming to you from 701 East Franklin Street, 8th floor, which is the same floor as their office. So I can just walk around the corner, but I want to know what I'm talking about because this is new information to me, and I appreciate that.
Yeah, we'll do.
Tommy.
When you, at some point, I hope you'll hear back from the Rappahannock tribe. I just wanted to let you know they have a historian, a college professor from Louisiana who comes up every summer and works with them, but he is the Rappahannock tribe historian, and he might be a welcome guest next month.
I appreciate that. Thank you. I'm working, my point of contact is Alana on their staff, and she's going to try to have comments back on that history piece by the end of next week, the first of the following. And I'm not, how she's doing the review of that is up to them. But I wanted to give them something to react to. I will simply say that the AI program Claude really helped identify some sources, some interesting sources. And Jillian and I learned some stuff that we didn't know. And in both in the ancient history, but then also in what our Commonwealth did in the Jim Crow era, which was, well, I'll just be I'll reveal my bias, was pretty egregious. And it's an important part of the history that needs to be known. There are probably plenty of people who know it, but there's an awful lot of people who don't. And as we consider, what is their role compared to the existing categories, which are legislators and non-legislative, and non-legislative has two subcategories, and that's the city and the counties, and representatives of the Soil and Water Conservation District, all of which are elected officials. And so they clearly don't fit as legislators, so it would have to be the other categories. That makes sense. And if it doesn't, should there be another category, or should there be some that's the kind of stuff we're kicking around. But thank you, Tommy. That's a valuable piece of information. If you have a chance, pop me an email with his name, if you got it.
Yes, I'll send you Ed's contact information.
Great. Thanks very much. Other comments, questions? We're closing in on 10 o'clock. Okay. Again, thanks to John, thanks to Larry, thanks to everybody who provided input. Deirdre, let's see, we've got and Chris and Don and Tommy, and I hope VDH, Ella, this is your first time joining our group. I hope this was valuable and useful for you guys. And feel free, if you want to weigh in on any parts of this, you can do that by email, and we'll put it in the mix. But thanks, everybody. Same time next month. And we'll have two topics to try to cram into our time period. Lisa, you turned your camera on. Did you have anything you wanted to add at the end?
No, just thank you all for interesting and terrifying discussion all at once. So.
All right. Jillian will email everybody in this group when the stuff is posted. Give us a day or two. We're actually working on a annual conference for one of our other clients, and that is more than a little time consuming. So, all right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.